So when you hear the phrase strategic workforce planning, which activities come to mind? It's a little bit confusing because in the history of HR, the phrase workforce planning has really been used to describe activities like scheduling resources by the day or hour. So it's really an optimization of scheduling. To use the entire phrase strategic workforce planning is something different. It's really a longer-term plan aligned to your business strategy, usually in the time period of 1 to 5 years, depending on the speed of change in your industry. If you take a look at something like manufacturing, you can probably plan a little bit longer than if you look at the rate of change of technology. So why do strategic workforce planning? If you've only joined HR in the last few years, you'll probably think that strategic workforce planning is a very new and popular topic. It's actually a very old topic, but there are certain factors that have made it more popular in recent years. One of the factors was the economic decline in 2008. In 2008, many companies in the U.S. found themselves laying off a substantial amount of their workforce, but there was really no strategic logic behind which job roles should go and which job roles should stay. The other impact to the workforce right now in many countries is the baby boomer wave going through. As the baby boomer workforce approaches retirement, it's going to leave a lot of vacant jobs. As an example, in Canada, the birth rate over time has declined so much that they actually don't have enough new births in the country to actually maintain the population. They therefore rely on things like immigration to stabilize the population quantity. Japan's birth rates are even more concerning because they don't have the amount of immigration to sufficiently offset the lack of births in their country. They have a very greatly aging population. In countries like Europe, it varies by country, but with slowing economy and right now fairly volatile economy, these countries are not attracting enough immigrants to maintain their population stability either. So even one of the wealthiest countries in the EU, which is Germany, has reported declining birth rates in recent years. As strategic workforce planning grew in popularity, people began to develop and publish models of a process you can follow for workforce planning. I'm showing two different models from two different organizations on the screen at the moment. If you take a look at the various steps, you'll see that they're actually quite similar. Both of them reference the business strategy, or in the second case, it actually says strategy analysis. Both of them are looking at scenario planning, so some sort of forward look of the headcount or the workforce that you need. And both of them reference the gap analysis. The problem with these is I found that in practical application, they were too complex to quickly convey what the process was to people that were not familiar with workforce planning. Generally the leadership of HR and the leadership outside of HR. These are the people whose support you need in order to have a successful workforce planning program. And depending on where the business strategy was actually developed inside a particular company, some of these models didn't necessarily work. I also found that activities from the environmental scan cross over multiple steps of this process, so I actually keep it completely separate, which you'll see in the next slide. So in this particular slide, I developed my own workforce planning model, and you can see I've kept it to 5 basic steps. The business strategy on the far left impacts the very first step, which is to determine the roles of interest. You'll see that I don't call it critical roles or pivotal roles, and there is a reason for that that I'll explain later. In the second step, we establish the current state and analyze historical trends. For those who tend to cross over between workforce analytics and workforce planning, this is really where they overlap because there's a lot of workforce analytics that goes into that second step. The business strategy again impacts the third step because it helps you to determine the desired forecasting scenarios that you would like to use for your workforce planning. The fourth step, similar to the previous two models that I showed you, are to perform gap assessments. These gap assessments can be gaps in both headcount and skill sets. The final step is essentially, the what at the end. We've now figured out what's going on, but what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do to close the gaps that you addressed in the fourth step?